All True Believers, written and read by Elizabeth Enix. I rebuke you in the name of Jesus. I rebuke you in the name of Jesus, Zelzy incanted as she lay in bed. She'd fallen asleep that night the same way she did every night, lying on her back with one hand down her pants while the other clutched her favorite stuffed animal. Zelzy didn't fall asleep this way for the reason you might expect. She wouldn't explore that sort of play until many years later, shortly after stumbling upon a box of romance novels her aunt kept hidden in the attic. No, Zelzy fell asleep this way because it's the only way she could fall asleep without feeling like a corpse. She'd been to a few funerals, and she'd never seen someone buried with their hands shoved down their pants. Just as Zelzy had been falling asleep the same way every night for years, she'd been waking up the same way every night for years, terrified and with a distinct feeling that she was being watched. Sometimes, Zelzy could even see the outline of a hooded figure sitting at the end of her bed. These episodes left Zelzy with an aching chest and sweat-soaked pajamas, but she always managed to fall asleep again long before dawn. Her nights had played out this way for as long as Zelzy could remember, cloaking even holiday evenings in dread, and that dread had only grown since last Sunday. Like she did most Sundays, Zelzy sat in a pew near the back with a friend while her aunt sat at the piano. Zelzy usually paid more attention to the comic strips her friend drew on the tithing envelopes than to the preacher himself, but last Sunday's sermon grabbed Zelzy's attention and held on tight. All true believers will be tested with a demonic visitation, the preacher said, prying Zelzy's eyes from her friend's comic strip for the first time that morning. All week, Zelzy wondered if the figure who sometimes sat at the end of her bed was actually a demon, and if he'd come back that night. She thought about him on Monday during her spelling test and ended up misspelling the word anguish. At recess the next day, she lost a race to a boy she'd always been able to outrun. The day after that, she burst into tears at the dinner table when she couldn't stop picturing the figure's hooded form. She thought of him throughout ballet class on Thursday and kept plie-ing out of sync with the other dancers. When Friday finally came, she couldn't even finish her lunch. Zelzy thought about the figure every single morning while she was feeding her cat, Pepper, and she thought about him every single night as well, especially when she'd awake, as if to the snap of invisible fingers, frozen with fear. She thought of him more often than not, and she told no one, as if describing his previous visits might summon him. Tonight was Saturday night, and he was back. When Zelzy awoke in the middle of the night, she didn't just feel a presence. She spotted one at the foot of her bed. It's why she'd been repeatedly whispering the phrase she'd learned at church, the one that was meant to banish evil spirits. But no matter how many times she repeated it, he just sat there. He didn't make a sound. He didn't turn to look at Zelzy. He didn't try to touch her face or grab her feet. He didn't move at all. When Zelzy's heartbeat slowed and her breaths evened out, she stopped incanting. Still, he didn't move. I'll close my eyes for just a second, she thought. When she opened them, it was morning. That Sunday's comic strip featured a Harvard-educated possum, and Zelzy reread it twice before church ended. Zelzy and her aunt had a lunch of macaroni and cheese, mashed potatoes, fried okra, cornbread, and green beans, and Zelzy ate 2 helpings of everything. She even had room for banana pudding. Afterwards, she read 2 chapters of Charlotte's Web before taking a walk in the woods with Pepper. Zelzy's aunt drew her a bubble bath that evening, and the 2 of them watched The Wizard of Oz when Zelzy was finished. Zelzy thought about the figure less than she had in days, and when she did think of him, she thought only of how he didn't respond to the phrase she'd learned at church. If it didn't banish him, maybe he isn't evil? He didn't visit Zelzy that night or for several nights after, and while she still thought of him sometimes, those thoughts didn't keep her from acing her quizzes. They didn't mess with her timing during dance class or keep her from finishing her meals either. The longer he stayed away, the more Zelzy hoped he would visit her again. When he did, she tried talking to the figure. After her heartbeat calmed and her breathing eased, she asked him his name. She asked him if he was her guardian angel. She asked him why he was cloaked in black if he was her guardian angel. She asked him why he never lowered his hood and how he'd gotten into her room. She asked him if he could fly. But the figure simply sat at the foot of Zelzy's bed. When he visited her a few nights later, Zelzy skipped the questions altogether. "Thank you for watching over me," she whispered when she could speak. A few nights after that, she told him a funny story about Pepper. And a few nights later, she told him a funny story about her aunt. Within a month, Zelzy would simply acknowledge his presence the way she would a dog or a cat's. She'd reach into the darkness, hoping to fill his cloak. Then, with one arm outstretched while the other cradled her favorite stuffed animal, she'd go back to sleep.